So welcome everybody. This is Violet, and she is actually going to give more than one talk today. She's actually going to give a talk now, and she's actually going to chair the panel that's closing the whole Connect event, which is just after this talk. So with this, Violet will introduce herself, and I'll let you rip, Violet.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks for having me. And I'm always really happy to talk to folks about spatial tech, urban tech, AEC tech, whatever you call it, prop tech, all very related. And I'm a big advocate for people that traditionally started out in architecture or real estate getting more into technology. So this is one of my favorite things to talk about and really nerd out about. So thanks for having me. I'm gonna actually jump right into the presentation because that's where my intro lives. Let's see. Oh, I come from a tech background, but I'm always guilty of taking a moment to figure out how to share my screen in a new device. So give me a sec. Haha! I have figured it out. So, do you see a screen? Can someone audibly tell me they can see spatial technology on my screen? I can't hear you, so I'm going to assume that's a yes. Someone say no if that's not the case.
Yes.
Okay, you can never be too careful. Great. Well, today I'm going to talk a bit about two of my classes at Columbia that point to larger changes in design and computation, and really how designers, especially architects, are working in the spatial, what I like to call spatial technology area. So I'm an adjunct at Columbia. I'm also an advisor on a new master's program there called Computational Design Practices. If you're currently considering a master's degree in such a field, I encourage you to check it out because the applications are now and it's about to launch. And we're really excited about this new program. And then I'm also a director of product for Delve at Sidewalk Labs. It's a generative design product, or if you're not familiar with that term, it's AI master planning product. And then also co-organize more of a network around urban tech, spatial tech. And that's got a really vibrant Slack community. So if you're not part of that, it's a really great place to learn about jobs in the field, meet other mentors, meet other peers, figure out how to transition to the many roles that exist within urban technology. Yeah, so please feel free to contact me through all the means, LinkedIn, wherever. I'm very into this stuff, if you can't tell already. I like talking about it. All right, so let's just kind of set up the premise for why so much change is happening right now in spatial tech. So from Airbnb to Amazon Echoes, I would argue the internet has had more drastic impact on cities than any physical invention in the last century. Architects might not like hearing that. Dating apps like Tinder lead to an increasing number of matches and marriages each year. Ultimately, its algorithm is going to shape the genetic makeup of the human race. As swipes are made, humans are matched, and babies are born. So pretty extreme changes we're seeing take place right now. They are not always bad, but sometimes bad unintended consequences of the way the internet's impacting our behavior. The filters of real estate websites dictate what someone sees. So they filter the makeup of who lives in different neighborhoods. They choreograph people through these siloed canals across the city, so both online and in the city. When a recommendation engine reinforces a user's preferences, they generate spatialized filter bubbles. So if I have specific preferences on what types of places I would like to see on Yelp or elsewhere, it's going to start to dictate where I move in my life and the types of places within the city I even know about. So it's really reshaping our reality, not just in this kind of um, abstract way on the internet. It's really changing where we go and what we even see as our physical world. So in one of my classes called Data Mining the City, students that are traditionally from architecture or urban design and planning try not to just think about the walls, the streets, the infrastructure. If you think about Rhino, it's really 3 dimensions at a single moment in time. Really looking at the physical, like again, it's like the walls. But we try and think not about this noun way of looking at architecture, but really the verb way of looking at architecture. We try and think through how we model behavior, time, movement, growth, policy, interactions. Some of these more difficult to make concrete concepts, and try and understand, really what is the performance or the behavior of these things we're building, or the things that exist already in the city. So the design of systems today, it can't just be thought about as the physical aspects. We really need to investigate things like capacities, movement, growth, and behavior. I think especially now, um, uh, with the ability to understand movement through data, to understand the behavior of things through many other types of data, um, this is actually more feasible now than it may have been in the past. So I'll show a few student projects. This student was looking at how a ride sharing app and making just subtle changes in the UI impacts the waiting times in physical space. So an abstract agent-based model, but we can see when um, making adjustments to the UI, how the actual time you're waiting for a vehicle would change. This student was looking at infection spread rate based on the physical characteristics of a city. So open spaces versus dense areas where people might linger. I will say this was pre-COVID, um, but definitely relevant to think about how physical environments actually impact things like infection spread rate. This student was looking at testing pedestrian routes of a street network based on changing the amount of time someone would stroll versus walk fast. So if you think about the kind of typical routing algorithm, the shortest path algorithm, how does that change based on the speed or walk rate that someone would have on a street? And similar in that vein, the student was looking at Google's walk path and how it could change cities' flows if you customize its shortest path algorithm with preferences like give me directions on a path that's more comfortable, that passes nature with lower noise levels, or where there's more activity on the street. So trying to think about these kind of um, I don't know if I'd say black box, but a kind of default that lives in an algorithm that structures our behavior of where we go, and thinking about what would happen if we had more control to customize that, and how might that in aggregate change movement in cities. So the planning of cities really can't just be about these physical aspects, because so much of our lived experience in cities is really about the behavior. It's about the verb way of looking at architecture. That's like the most succinct way I've found thus far to explain this, is like noun versus verb. But it's not just that kind of urban scale that we were talking about, the you know, the aggregate societal flows that we see at the urban scale that we have to think about, where behavior is changing. Um, so architects also really need to think about technology's impact on behavior in our kind of one-on-one bodily interaction. So I'm talking to you on a screen right now in my home. Sometimes I forget about my whole physical reality around me, um, my bodily existence, because I'm having this interaction with my screen. So it's safe to say that our behavior has really been reshaped by modern day technologies uh, in a um, in a very like one-on-one interaction. We've seen this emergence of a bunch of IoT smart home products. You know, the Nest thermostat, door locks with smart cameras. They'll have this kind of grandiose vision of breaking down that disconnect between the internet and the computer on this little device and the rest of our reality. So really trying to break down the um, separation. It's not the computer and my reality. It's an interlinked, connected reality. It's just my physical reality, but with um, more sophisticated ways of interacting with the information that is shared by the internet. Um, I would argue that currently this isn't really living up to its potential. It can sometimes be a bit gimmicky, or um, getting a notification that my Amazon package arrived from an Echo doesn't really uh, fulfill my desire to to be more connected with my present moment, or like my physical reality. But I do think that there's potential here. So in this other class, Measuring the Great Indoors, which I co-teach with Gabby Brainerd, we have architect and urban design students investigate the spatial, the tangible, and impromptu potential of web connectivity. So all the things that web connectivity is not doing very well through smart home products right now. And the goal here is really to heighten our connection to the physical world and each other by designing interactions that are beyond the screen. So what students do is they hack together smart home products, cameras, projectors with microservices. This term microservices, um, if you haven't heard of it, one example is if this then that. If you haven't heard of that, really it allows you to create custom routines um, with multiple recipes. So let's say you have a camera, you have a fan, you have a plug, um, you have an occupancy sensor, you have your email that lives on the web. All those are different services, and microservices allow us to get those to really easily talk to each other with using really simple, almost sentence-like programming. So rather than having to program, having a master's degree in computer science, we have the ability to program those routines in a much more approachable way. So I'll give you a sense of some of the quick ideas we prototyped. These are microservice routines that the students developed with. I really like naming the things we come up with. I'll just let you read for a little bit. There's a wide array of types of recipes you can create. So this is a student project from a few years ago. She was interested in what it would look like if our smart home systems like the Amazon Echo had stronger personalities. So he prototyped a pushy smart home system that would try and get you to open the window if the weather outside was nice. So you can, you know, connect things like the weather information to give commands. Wenya was interested in the governance and voting systems behind aspects like turning on or off a light or changing a thermostat. So when you're with a group of people, how do you decide whether the light gets turned on or off? How do you decide how to set the temperature? She used the moods of people in a room to change the lighting environment. And in this example, we see the light change at a party when everyone's having fun. But when one person gets angry or sad, then the light changes. So really, the way the current internet is structured and smart home products, they typically are really set up as the one person, one computer, um, individualized user preferences, but we occupy these spaces together. Rooms are really much more social than an individual. So, one opportunity of this new way of thinking is really thinking much more about the social experiences rather than user experiences. What is the governance system when you have a family together or a stranger walks into a room? Who has authority and permissions on changing the environment, and how easy is it for them to do that? A lot of aspects that designers really need to think about and haven't done so great a job yet. Arechi used an airbag that forces brakes when you've been on your computer for too long. This is a light that shuts off every time a train passes this student's window to create this ritual of listening to the train's wave-like sounds. So her apartment was right next to this train, and got her lights to actually sync up with that train's schedule. So this really changes this idea of the user interface as being this thing that's on a device or it's a button, thinking much more about the whole environment as an interface, much more of a spatial interface. So, what are the kind of rules I want to set around my environment? Is my table or window really the interface? Is the moment I walk in a room the interface? So, haikus for the great indoors is this next project I'll show you. And hopefully my audio works because it's an audio-based project. Um, I'll just play it first and then explain it. So these were 3 students working together. This was during COVID. So students in different houses, all in different cities across the world. Um, and they wanted to have a haiku read to them about their environments, about their great indoors. Anytime someone who they considered their virtual roommate, basically these 3 students in different cities, anytime one of them turned off their light, they wanted everyone else's light to turn off and to read an automated haiku. So, with the aim of really connecting one another in a maybe more impromptu way. So So this student just simply used projection. This was all during COVID. So you can imagine, well, I suppose we're still in COVID, but during the initial lockdown, um, you can imagine that desire for feeling like you're going somewhere else if you're cooped up in a room. So they used their projector and just framed it around this window. You see here, this black box, to make it feel like they were riding a train. And this group of students was also in 3 different cities, and they wanted to look at what they called a synchronized wallpaper, so a projected wallpaper that would update anytime anyone leaves or enters their webcam frame. So the aim was to really serve as a visual reminder and a connector to the constant activities that were happening in each one of their homes when they were in these very isolated environments. So how do we create much more connected experiences in our environments that you might get from a coffee shop when you're together, but instead have that when we're working in totally different environments? You see the light change there when someone else left their webcam frame. So technology has a lot to learn from urban designers and architects. I think these flat computers are only really flat because there weren't enough architects and urban designers in the room when we started developing computers. But vice versa, architects have a lot to learn from technologists to think about behavior in the urban scale and in the design of buildings. So I like to use this prompt that instead of thinking about user experiences, we should really be thinking about social experiences. Instead of thinking about user interfaces, we should really be thinking about spatial interfaces. So I will part you with this this call to action, which is as architects, we really have to engage in beyond the physical nature of architecture. We need to think about its affordances. We need to think about interaction in space and how both the physical and digital interact with one another and how they change our lived experiences. And architects really need to also recognize our unique ability to think about space and the systems and social aspects of physical space and find opportunities within the technology that's being developed right now to influence the direction so that when we develop these technologies, whether that be smart home products, whether that be generative design software, that we're able to think about those spatial and social systems that might be a bit more foreign to other disciplines. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Violet, for this very interesting talk. I'm showing up like the host now. Like, we have some time. If the audience has any questions and answers, we'll be happy to go through them. Besides claps or emojis of claps, this is one of the big disadvantages of like online conferences, you don't actually get to hear the claps.
If only there was an audible way to give an emoji in person.
Exactly. I think this kind of ties into a bit into what you were just talking. Essentially, in a very cheesy way, of course. But it's interesting because what I see, like, I think there was one pervasive question, like, I'll try and break the ice a bit. There was one pervasive question, I think, maybe on, Thursdays, like, people, there's a kind of sentiment that, like, kind of architects are becoming a bit irrelevant as a kind of, as a breed, or as a I don't know, as a discipline per se. And I think, I mean, this is more of an observation, but, like, okay, let's transform that observation into a question. What do you think about this?
Yeah, it actually upsets me, because I will tell you, when I was going through school, I was like the most pain in the ass student to have, because every studio project, I was like, I'm not making a building, I'm making a system. And the instructor was like, no, make the building. And I'm like, no, but we got to think about the behavior and the scale, man. They're like, oh my gosh, please. But I think, I think that we haven't done enough and I think it starts like in architecture schools, really, where some of this culture is set, but also in practice and in firms. We haven't done enough to like coin what we have, like to recognize working in the technology sector, whether that's prop tech, spatial tech, AEC tech, whether that's working in smart home products, whether you're working at Seamless or Yelp or Amazon, and you're thinking about the spatial, or you're like doing data visualization, or just thinking about a user experience interaction in physical space, we're like, oh, they left architecture. And I'm like, yes. we don't need to think about it like that. Like, architects should be coining this. Like, I think most of my expertise has come from my education within schools or within architecture firms, thinking more like about social systems and how things go together, and thinking about the way of like visualizing information in a time and spatial way. So like, why haven't we adopted that? I think there's like a little bit too much fear of things changing, that it's not architecture.
Yeah.
And I'll also say I didn't get my license, which was like another like which, is like the ultimate signal of leaving architecture. But to me, I'm like, I'm doing architecture. It's just we need to do better culturally to be like.
I see.
Yeah.
No, I understand. Like, I've had a very similar education, I think, where we were taught to do buildings, which are like big static things. Space is something that's ultimately fixed. And then, like, I mean, just by association, there were some kind of like breeds of thought, like, for example, space syntax, saying that social life, a city is basically like, where social, it's like the framework on which essentially social life happens, and that's its main role. I might be misquoting Bill Hillier now, so if anyone knows, please, I apologize.
That sounds accurate.
But fair enough. Like, and that's why I'm very happy when I basically saw the presentation of your courses and the exercises that you're taking the students through, because it's actually, you're providing an answer to like, how can architects not become extinct, let's say, as a as a job.
I feel like the thing that's becoming extinct is more an old model of working within architecture. It's like designing a one-off solution for a singular site for a singular client. Let's say also usually a 1%er client, like someone that has access to like ultimate means. That's becoming more outdated.
I'm sure Andrew, who's in the audience, is probably, there we go. He's already chimed in with the emoji.
I see you, Andrew.
Yes, like just plugging in the panel, guys. That is going to happen in more or less half an hour from now, where Andrew's going to probably talk at length together with Violet more on this.
Only ever agreeing with me, of course.
That's a given. Otherwise, we can kick him off. So yes, okay, good. Other questions: how do students react to these kind of courses? This is something that, for me, if I would have seen this in like my, let's say, second year of uni, I would have jumped on it, right? But what is the general reaction that you see?
Yeah, I think students are really excited about this way of working, and they always almost surprise me in the work where I think at the end of some final presentations, I was borderline like crying with happy tears, just like, wow, how did you come up with this? So I think they always surprise me in like how much they engage with it. One difficulty I think right now is um, I think there's a real economic reality that every student is facing. Like especially in the U.S., student debt is really high, and um, the kind of, I would say, historical or like traditional way of working in architecture is dying in many ways. And I don't think altogether it will disappear, but it's changing, and it's not a lucrative profession. So a lot of students have very pragmatic advice about, or want pragmatic advice about, like, what do I do after school with this degree? And hey, I've been putting into practice all these um, technology forward ways of thinking about architecture. What fields are available to me? And I think um, the advice I try and give is really to, like, when you're applying to jobs in that field, if you're not going to go like an entrepreneurial route, you want to work in the industry, that you really have to upsell what you bring to the table, because people don't know about this other side of architecture. They know about like putting buildings together. So you need to be able to, if you're going one-to-one with someone that's trained as a product designer or UI designer, you're never going to be as good of a UI designer by that checkbox of criteria. You need to come forward and like show that you can think about spatial and logistics things, that you can like think about the societal impacts, which is really high leverage in a lot of these companies. But I think you need to connect the dots for them and show that expertise. But I think that the biggest struggle for students is like kind of that path isn't very well set. So it can be really difficult. And I think especially in this kind of like spatial user experience stuff that I'm talking about, like working in smart home products, like that field almost doesn't really exist yet. So it's harder to kind of like chart a course there, because it's maybe newer or undefined.
Yeah, I see. At the same time, like I kind of echo what you said. Like Alexa telling me that an Amazon package was dropped off is like kind of not really the most amazing application of this technology. So maybe there's actually a distinct lack of this kind of students. And like, like, okay, great, I can switch on my lights using my phone, but I mean, that's like a glorified remote control, isn't it? So
yeah, exactly.
We've got a really long question that I have to read now from Dan Serkoy. So Dan is saying, what is Dan saying? That although inherently in any of the home devices made by something delightful takes on a creepy, how are we making money off? Yes. How can there be? It's a very good point. Violet, it's all yours. I'm happy I don't actually have to answer these questions.
I know sometimes I get questions and I feel like there's a little bit of a like, how do we fix global capitalism? And I'm like, I don't know, man. I'm trying to figure it out. But I think that's a really good point. Like, one of the big things we've been trying to think through with this class, and like just having the opportunity Andrew, I'm not going to answer that. But I do think one of the big opportunities that we have in this class is to think through some of those problems. Like, one of the most hilarious things about using microservices is that you realize the whole ecosystem of these smart home products is all these different systems that don't like talking to each other. And so it's like a very commercialized world. So how do we like make that less commercial and less about the device itself and more about like the whole experience? Or like in the terms of privacy and tracking, you know, it's all about the attention economy and trying to get your attention. So a big premise of the class is also like, how do we create more ambient environments that are not about actions or attention, but much more about like maybe a more meditative state. So a big portion of that class is structured around this book called How to Do Nothing, which is by this artist named Jenny Odell. It's really like a big critique of the attention economy. Like, how do we not engage in that? So I don't have a good answer other than like I think it's really up to people designing these systems to think a lot more about like the privacy implications, and also maybe create more open systems here that aren't all about monetization, because like we're talking about our homes, you know, and like you put up a wall in a house and I'm not worried that, you know, someone's trying to make money off of me based on where that wall is.
Indeed, yeah. And I think also like by virtue of the fact that you are encouraging students to work in this direction, they gain the skills through which to actually like develop these devices that are not, let's say, capitalist driven devices, you know, can just hack their own stuff. Of course, this is obviously not an answer to how do we fix global capitalism.
Dimitri solved it. No, but I do think that there's like a I think it's really difficult because every individual is like navigating the same complex world. So it's like maybe I'm working at Nest or I'm working at Amazon and I need it for my livelihood, and they need to make sure they're creating a system that is economically viable. But at the same time, how do we make sure that that's not like predatory?
We have another question now from Dale. Do you think people will curate these interactions themselves, or would there be a service that curates for them on their behalf? This is a bit of a like, okay, gradient from how do we fix global capitalism? Like, you know, it's,
yeah, I think the more that what I'm excited about like low code environments or microservices is that I think it, I really like this idea of what's called end user programming. The idea is that like instead of people with CS degrees, that kind of the end person using something can program its behavior. And I think the more we see more open systems, I mean, you kind of saw this a little bit with like the Apple Store, that there was an explosion of all these apps that were, I mean, definitely took more programming, like people with CS degrees. But I think the more you have an open system, people can create their own recipes and share it. So like, you know, one student in my class was did a project where all her smart home systems were synced with different routines or schedules of kind of like famous people's routines. So like Beethoven or or like Einstein had this thing where you like sleep every, so I don't know if that's true, but so I think there's like this kind of interesting premise of being able to subscribe to different environments or like different smart home product recipes. So I think we're moving towards a world where or I would like to move towards a world where it's more easy for the end user to develop recipes and then also like share them back with other environments. Like, hey, I've tweaked my smart home system to do this type of behavior or to be on this kind of live work routine with my alarms. Like, you try it out.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. And I think it's also like, I mean, there's inherently dangers in this kind of walled gardens appearing, like kind of, you know, but I suspect this is something that the future will tell. And then I think it's about, you know, as like Violet, you were saying, like imposing kind of an open agenda from the get-go. And you're also infusing throughout your courses certain kind of moral values, I suspect. Like, in a sense, there's a clear cultural push in what you're doing, and I, for one, appreciate that. So if there's no more questions for the audience, I suspect Violet would need a maybe small break before we jump in the panel. Let's just see if Andrew comes up with another question. Like, what is the meaning of life? Yes. No, he's silent. Okay. Ha. Okay.
Save it for the next one. Save it for the next one.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so just as a reminder for the rest of the people listening in like, I'm checking my time now, I think in 10 minutes or in 15 minutes, we've got the so-called cheesily titled The Bleeding Edge in AEC panel going on, where I suspect there's going to be even more interesting conversation on these lines, chaired by Violet together with Andrew, Jonathan, well, I should actually say Andrew from Hyde Park, Jonathan from Outer Labs, and Guy from AEC Works / Airbnb in secret. Okay, see you all soon.